effort again.
We're busting ours to kick yours.
That's big time.
Minus 15.
Respect all, fear none.
Oh, did he belt that one?
Intensity is not a perfume.
It was a no-doubter.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We are up in the bird's nest here at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. I'm Brendan Mortensen, joined via Zoom by Annie Claff, who joins us from a Barnes & Noble. Annie, I know you were trying to get a head start on your holiday travel. First of all, how dare you? But second, thank you for finding some time. I assume this time it looks like you're maybe in the artwork section of Barnes & Noble, but thanks for taking some time.
Yeah, I should have known trying to make the trip a little bit early that something was going to happen. Brendan and I were texting earlier today, and I said, you know what, if something happens, then no worries. I'm only an hour and a half away. I can drive back. But of course, something happened mid-drive.
Yeah.
So I guess there's that. But no, I am not in a Barnes & Noble this time. That was one time. I'm just at the old folks' house.
It was one time that you've been at a Barnes & Noble every single time that we've done the podcast, but you join us for good reason, because for the second week in a row, the Bird's Nest is now with you for breaking news. Last week, it was when the Orioles signed free agent Pete Alonso to a 5-year deal, and now we are here to discuss the acquisition of starting pitcher Shane Baz from the Tampa Bay Rays, and the Orioles sent a haul out to get him. It was a prospect package that included 2 first-round picks from this past year in Slater DeBrun and Caden Bodine, and then 2 prospects on the rise at AA in Michael Ferret and Austin Overn, as well as a competitive balance round A pick. And Annie, I guess I'll just start there with your initial reaction to the deal.
Yeah, my initial reaction is just the fact that it is one lump sum. Like, that is a big deal for Shane Baz, which, yes, you are filling a big need that was in this offseason for kind of a back end of the rotation piece, or maybe a middle of the rotation piece, kind of wherever you slot Shane Baz in terms with Dean Kramer, Tyler Wells, and then also maybe potentially a new front end of the rotation piece to come. But the fact of the matter, I was a little bit surprised by how much it took to get Shane Baz. Yes, you are getting a very solid pitcher who has come back from Tommy John surgery in a big way and in a durable way in 2024 with 31 starts this year. That's a great sign from the right-hander, but you are giving up a lot of it in return. But then I kind of thought to myself, I said, okay, when you bolster the farm system, you're doing it for 2 reasons. One, to kind of develop these players in-house and make them move through the ranks in your own organization and bring them up to be potential big league contributors. And then the second reason is just to use them as leverage and capital for a trade moving forward. So you're doing exactly that, having bolstered the farm system just last year, and you can see that with 2 of the guys that were traded away to make this happen. And then same goes for the other ones who have been brought up and done very well in Michael Ferret and Austin Overn.
Yeah, I think it's fair to have an initial reaction of, whoa, and that's not to necessarily say that the Orioles overpaid for a pitcher like Shane Baz. I think it more so just tells you what the price tag is on a 26-year-old pitcher with multiple years of team control. If you want to go out and get a young, controllable arm who, as we're going to get into, didn't put up the best ERA last season, but maybe more importantly, posted 31 times when coming back from Tommy John surgery, as you mentioned, that he had in 2022, that was an important sign. And the pedigree for a former first-round pick is there. We're going to dive into those numbers. But I think it is fair to say, whoa, that's a lot of prospects, because when you now look at the Rays' updated top 30, according to MLB Pipeline, Michael Ferret is the highest ranked prospect of the ones they got in return at number 5. Slater DeBrun comes in at number 6. Caden Bodine checks in at number 11, and Austin Overn is at number 20. So that's a lot of good prospects, along with a first-round pick that is going to be somewhere in the 30s. But again, that's the price that you have to pay if you are going to get a pitcher that is under team control until 2029, like Baz is, somebody with his pedigree and with his stuff, as we are going to talk about. But I think it just, too, goes to show what the Orioles are prioritizing in terms of their window, right? The two guys that maybe jump off the page in this deal are Slater DeBrun and Caden Bodine because they are first-round picks from a season ago. DeBrun, ironically, was drafted with the pick that you acquired from Tampa Bay in the Brian Baker deal. But those two guys, again, they haven't played above low A to this point. So at the earliest, they are probably contributing in 2028, 2029. Michael Ferret and Austin Overn. Ferret is a really intriguing young pitching prospect, as you probably know if you are a longtime listener of the show. He has been one of my guys for years now. It is really, really great stuff. And he might turn out to be a really good starting pitcher. But he has a limited sample size in Double-A at this point. So again, you're talking about a potential debut in 2027. Maybe he's contributing that season going into 2028. Austin Overn has a small sample size at Double-A. Those are all guys that could contribute down the road. Shane Baz is going to contribute right now.
Yeah, and you could also kind of make the argument that maybe we saw this coming just with how many draft picks that they had this past year and Mike Elias even made it known that, okay, we're going to use these plentiful draft picks that we have early on before the second round even begins as maybe just grow them in our own organization, but also use them potentially as trade pieces, whatnot. He mentioned that, I think, maybe a couple of times. So we can't be too surprised when you find that out. But I do agree with you in the sense of the urgency is certainly there, and every move that the Orioles have made this offseason, it kind of keeps encroaching a little bit more towards to say that this is the most urgent offseason that we've seen in a long time from Baltimore. Obviously, you had the Taylor Ward, Grayson Rodriguez trade. You give up Grayson Rodriguez, who had some team control, but a lot of question marks when it came to health. Now you get Shane Baz in another kind of urgent trade, but you get him with similar team control. He's great, he has team control through 2029. But then at the same time, you have seen a more solid answer for the health for Shane Baz as you would have from Grayson Rodriguez. So it's safe to say that it's not a fair swap, but you are getting someone to replace the question marks that Grayson Rodriguez was, and also some other guys in the back end of the rotation that you needed to bring in some more depth for.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting swapping out maybe the spot in the rotation from Grayson Rodriguez to Shane Baz. But let's talk about Baz. This was, again, you bring up the Rodriguez comparison. Baz is another former top prospect in the game. In 2022, he was ranked as the 12th best overall prospect in baseball and the second best overall pitching prospect behind, you guessed it, Grayson Rodriguez, who was the best pitching prospect in baseball at that point. You also may remember Baz from the kind of now infamous Chris Archer trade, where the Pirates ended up sending 3 really good players to the Tampa Bay Rays in exchange for Chris Archer, who struggled there. And then Baz struggled with injuries. Like you mentioned, in 2022, he has multiple elbow surgeries, ends up getting Tommy John, misses the entirety of the 2023 season, comes back in 2024 and puts together a really nice year in 14 appearances. And then last year struggled. It's an ERA up close to 5. But you have to look a little bit deeper into those numbers specifically, because for the Rays organization last year, they were put in a really tough and unfortunate spot of having to play their home games at George Steinbrenner Field, which was the minor league home of the New York Yankees. And to say that that ballpark was hitter-friendly would be maybe doing that a disservice. That venue was top 12 in average exit velocity, in batting average, in hits and home runs. Guys were really teeing off there. And for Shane Baz, it was a pretty drastic split between how he performed at home versus on the road. At home, it's an ERA close to 5, and on the road, it's an ERA in the mid-3s. So maybe the Orioles are looking at somebody like Baz, and yeah, on the surface, you can look at an ERA upwards of 4.80 and say, okay, that's a lot to give up for a guy like that, but you got to dive a little bit deeper into the circumstances that led to that ERA being inflated last year.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up those splits because you mentioned the ERA, but 18. So for Shane Baz, he struggled with the home run ball in 2025, which is why the numbers are a little bit inflated. And like you mentioned, the ballpark played a huge role. When he was at home, 18 home runs were allowed as opposed to only 8 on the road for Shane Baz. And you also look at his expected home runs for just the ballparks in the division. So for the Tampa Bay Rays last year, his expected home runs was actually 30 when he gave up 26 total.
Yep.
So 30 is a lot, especially for Steinbrenner Field. Only 19 of them would have been converted in Camden Yards. So I think that is a big disparity as well to take into consideration. And very clearly, when you give up this big haul of players and prospects for a pitcher like Shane Baz, it just tells you the fact that Mike Elias and co. see a lot more in Baz than the numbers that happened in 2025. And I think that the durability coming back from injury and a bunch of surgeries says a lot for the fact of, okay, the Orioles rotation needed some stability, especially when you have Tyler Wells, who's coming back from injury, Kyle Bradish, who's coming back from injury, Trevor Rogers, who you don't know is going to be as sustainable as he was in 2025. So there's a lot of question marks there. And then you bring in Shane Baz to the rotation, who just put up 31 starts. That's probably the most starts out of anyone in the Orioles rotation now in 2025.
Yeah, I don't know if I would necessarily classify Baz as a reliable arm just at this point in his career from a starts perspective, just because we've only seen it one time because he missed the entirety of the 2023 season, came back in 2024 and was rehabbing, and then before the Tommy John surgery in 2022, had some injury concerns there, wasn't able to put together a full season. But you saw it last year, and I think that's the important part of that stability conversation, is that once you are looking to 2026, there's no reason to believe that Baz can't give you 30 starts again, because he just went out and proved it. And it's different than the Grayson Rodriguez conversation, where Rodriguez, unfortunately, was never able to put together a season like that in his career. And so for as many questions as there might be about Baz's stability and whether or not he can be a consistent 30-plus starts a year kind of guy, he did just do it. So the sample size of that being very recent is something that's really important there.
Yeah, also not to mention that the fastball velocity is still really great for Shane Baz, and that's something that you can look to after a Tommy John surgery and say, okay, if the velocity is really struggling, then you're kind of in some trouble. But for Shane Baz, it's a little bit different. He's averaging 97 miles per hour for his fastball. His off-speed pitches were not as great in 2025 as they were in 2024. He was in the 88th percentile in 2024 for that off-speed run value. It kind of diminished in 2025. So hoping to get that back on track. But when you look at the fastball velocity, that is a very positive sign, especially when it's still fairly recent coming back from a bunch of arm surgeries. Yeah,
let's talk about who Baz is just as a pitcher. He is a flamethrower, like you mentioned, the fastball velocity averaging 97 miles an hour. The knuckle curveball also has one of the best movement profiles in baseball.
Yeah.
This is a stuff guy. I know the Rays produce a lot of those sorts of pitchers. Shane Baz is that. He is a stuff dude, and it is really, really electric stuff. And he is not a pitcher that is he's not a 4.80 ERA pitcher. He is a pitcher that should be giving you an ERA at least somewhere in the threes. In 2024, yes, it was a smaller sample size, but it was a 3.06 ERA in those 14 starts. His expected ERA last year was a little bit higher than that, but it was still at 3.85. That's a full run lower than the 4.87 that he gave you a season ago. So if you are looking just at the ERA and saying, man, this is a lot to give up for a 4.87 ERA pitcher, he's not a 4.80 ERA pitcher. His underlying metrics are a heck of a lot better than that. According to Matt Weyrich, he was one of just 8 qualified pitchers in baseball last year to be in the top 20 in both strikeout rate and ground ball rate. That's something that we have talked about with guys that the Orioles could potentially look at acquiring this offseason. Somebody with a high ground ball rate makes a lot of sense to join this team with the just unbelievable athleticism that you find in the Orioles infield with Jackson Holliday and Gunnar Henderson and Jordan Westburg. And the stuff is also good enough to strike a lot of guys out. So that's a really good combination of two things. He's going to get a lot of strikeouts, and he's going to induce a ton of ground balls.
Yeah, and that was a big conversation that we had when we were talking about our free agent starting pitcher wish list of okay, there's a bunch of guys, I mean, two most notably in Framber Valdez and Ranger Suarez, who are pretty good at generating those ground ball rates, especially Framber Valdez in that sense, but not necessarily at missing contact. Like they still got a lot of contact, but found ways to get out of it. It wasn't strong contact at all. But for Shane Baz, at least, you have that kind of perspective where you have the high ground ball rates and the high strikeout rates at the same time. So that's a little bit different from the Valdez and the Ranger Suarez kind of pitcher profiles. I also think it's important to zoom out and look at the rotation right now in a sense of you slot Shane Baz in, Cade Povich most notably kind of pulls out of the starting five. Maybe he goes to the bullpen. Who knows what happens with him. But I think that with the way it looks right now, you already feel better about the rotation. And yes, you are giving up a lot of guys with that are just prospects and could be big league contributors long down the road. But in return, you're getting Shane Baz that helps you make it to the playoffs in 2026. And that's been a very big theme for the Orioles in the offseason so far.
Yeah, let's move to that rotation conversation. As you mentioned, Shane Baz at this point maybe slots in as your number 3 behind Kyle Bradish and Trevor Rogers. I don't think I would put Baz ahead of either of those two guys based on Bradish's track record and what Rogers did in 2025. Still think Dean Kramer is solidly in the rotation. And then the number 5 spot, you're looking at Tyler Wells, who looked really good as a starter, yes, in just 4 games in 2025, but looked really good down the stretch last year. Cade Povich, who, yeah, the ERA was inflated a little bit, but had his moments in 2025. I think those two are probably your number 5 in the rotation contenders at this point. Maybe Brandon Young works his way into that conversation as well. And who knows, maybe the minor league edition of Albert Suarez that we mentioned as a possibility on our podcast on Wednesday, and then a few hours later, that becomes a move that the Orioles make. Maybe he is in that rotation conversation as well, but certainly you have a group of guys there that will contribute in some way, whether it's in the rotation or in the bullpen. I think you feel solid about Shane Baz as your number 3, and I think the rotation as a whole, you feel solid about at this point.
Yeah.
You feel pretty good, right? It's not like a, wow, look at all of the things the Orioles did for this rotation this offseason yet. And I think there are still moves to potentially be made in the starting rotation. There is room for maybe still that high-end guy that we have talked about a lot on the podcast. And then I think there's still a depth need, right? You still need to go into the season with 7, 8, 9 guys that you feel comfortable with making multiple starts for you in 2026. But with the addition of Baz, yes, he might not be the ace caliber guy. There's not really one of those guys available on the free agent market at this point anyway. I think this acquisition probably would tell you how expensive it would be from a haul perspective to get one of those ace caliber guys as well, because nothing against Shane Baz, that is still a hefty price to pay for somebody that put up the ERA that he did last year. Again, you dive deeper into it, you understand why that ERA was where it was, you get the first round pedigree and the top prospect pedigree, but that's still a lot for a controllable starting pitcher. So I think there are still potentially moves to be made in this starting rotation, but you feel a lot better about it with Baz's addition now.
Right. It's definitely a move that where the rotation now, like you said, it feels solid. It doesn't feel complete. Like it doesn't feel like it should be the way that it looks come opening day, but you feel better about the rotation than you did at the beginning of the offseason. I think you had the same perspective for every other move that's been made, with Andrew Kittredge being added to the bullpen, Ryan Helsley being added to the bullpen, and then obviously the impact hitters being added to the lineup, where you felt better about the lineup than at the beginning of the season. And then boom, you get Pete Alonso and you feel like your lineup is pretty darn good, not just good. It looks amazing, in fact. But for Shane Baz, I think you look at that rotation and the control, to me, is a little bit overlooked more than it should be. I think like it's huge that you have gotten someone to replace Grayson Rodriguez in that sense of having some more team control, because a lot of these other times they've acquired pitchers, whether it was the Corbin Burns deal or whatnot, it was just for 1 year. And then you kind of make that same assumption where the Orioles aren't going to get another pitcher for a lot of more years to come. And I think that when you have the opportunity to get Shane Baz through 2029 after giving up Grayson Rodriguez, and then there's still some room on the payroll and maybe a good chance that they bring in a free agent starting pitcher for hopefully a multi-year contract, then you would feel really good about it.
Yeah, and Baz, I would still classify as trending up. I know the ERA in 2025 was worse than it was in 2024, but as we've talked about here, the thing that you really needed to see from him was the health, was the ability to post 30-plus times, and that's what he did last season. I don't think there's any question about the stuff profile. I don't think there's questions about what he can do on the mound, despite what the ERA may have indicated last year. Again, it was an expected ERA in the 380s, and you would feel good about acquiring that guy under team control until 2029, through 2029, as you mentioned. If he's giving you a 380 ERA with the strikeout stuff that he has, you feel really good about acquiring that starting pitcher. And again, it was a lot of prospects that they gave up, but the general theme of this Orioles offseason has been that they are going for it. We are still pretty early in this offseason. We haven't even flipped the calendar to 2026 yet. And you're talking about additions like Pete Alonso, Taylor Ward, Ryan Helsley, Andrew Kittredge, and now Shane Baz, among others. That's a really good offseason already. And we haven't even reached Christmas yet. The Orioles are pushing the chips in. And as I mentioned off the top, those 4 prospects are good prospects. They rank in the Rays top 20 according to MLB Pipeline for a reason. Those are potential big leaguers that could help you down the line. Yes, the Orioles are still going to prioritize their future. They want to build something sustainable where they are going to win for multiple years down the line. But if you were looking at the core of this team, all of the young guys hitting their primes and the ability to supplement them with really good players that are helping you win right now, the focus is right now, and it should be. And that is the approach that the Orioles have taken so far this offseason, even if it comes at the price of, 4 prospects that rank in a division rival's top 20. That's not awesome, but you potentially get a really awesome piece in return.
100%. And especially when we've had the conversation of, okay, this is the most critical offseason yet for Mike Elias in his tenure with the Baltimore Orioles. There's only so many ways that you can be successful in a critical offseason like right now, especially when you're an organization like the Orioles, where you're a little bit different or built different than the Yankees, the Blue Jays, the Dodgers, you name it. There's only so many ways that you can kind of succeed in the offseason where you need to succeed. And the way to do it right now is to show that you can make it back to the playoffs this coming year. It's not like maybe we make it back to the playoffs in 2027 or 2028 or whatever. The time is now, and the urgency is extremely, extremely clear. And I, for one, think that it's a good plan. It's kind of the only plan that you would have to be able to make it back to the playoffs, especially with like you mentioned from the very beginning, the clock is not, it's running out, but it is in peak time right now to utilize the core that is still intact and utilize bringing in Pete Alonso and then also bringing in some pitchers throughout the offseason. So I think that when it came down to how you were going to succeed this offseason, you were going to have to give up a little bit of something for future capital.
Yeah, the window is open right now. And as you said, the farm system is there to make the big league team better. And whether they do that from the guys that are on the farm system developing into quality big leaguers for your team, or if they go out and get you value somewhere else, that is what the farm system is for. And I think if you're the Orioles with their record of draft success, you've got to feel pretty confident in the fact that you can draft more Slater DeBruns and Caden Bodines, and you can develop another Michael Ferret. The Orioles know how to draft, and they know how to develop. And last point I'll make on the prospect front, too, I would encourage you to go back and look at the prospects that Mike Elias has dealt away in his tenure. Yeah, there are guys like Kyle Stowers who have found success elsewhere. Of course, Trevor Rogers in that deal has also found a lot of success in Baltimore. I would encourage you to look at the list of the names that Mike Elias has dealt away on the prospect front. There aren't a lot of guys that are really popping elsewhere, and so I think the Orioles feel confident, not that this is a group of terrible players, they're good prospects, but the Orioles are comfortable with what they are able to give away. And yeah, it looks like a lot, but they've got to have a lot of confidence that Shane Baz is going to have a bounce-back season next year. Even though the underlying metrics were better than his 487, I think you're still expecting better than that in 2026. And that they can draft a lot of guys that are going to give you similar value to the 4 that they just traded away.
Yeah, and it always goes back to the phrase that we use around the draft and the trade deadline is, okay, you draft for the bat and then you trade for the arm, which is exactly the way the Orioles have operated. I mean, you look at the starting rotation on Fangraphs and obviously just knowing where they came from, not one pitcher in the starting rotation right now is homegrown, which you could have had Grayson Rodriguez in there, sure. But that's just kind of the way the cookie crumbles for the Orioles, and they have been pretty successful at it when it came to the draft and getting use out of those players in the draft to use them for leverage later on and trading for an arm. So if that's just the way that it has gone for the Orioles thus far, you're going to keep moving that way, and they have been successful with drafting these players, whether that's to use them at the big league level with Dylan Beavers and Kobe Mayo and Samuel Basayo, even in the international market, or just using their draft skills to get players that they can use moving forward in a trade like Trevor Rogers or Zach Eflin, Corbin Burns, you name it. So, you know, that's just the way that it has been for the Orioles so far.
Yeah, well, Kyle Bradish also acquired via trade. He was just a prospect at the time. So the Orioles rotation at this point, as you mentioned, it's a lot of guys that have been acquired via trade. Kyle Bradish, Trevor Rogers, now Shane Baz, Dean Kramer, Tyler Wells was a Rule 5 draft pick. Cade Povich was acquired via trade. So they are sticking to that strategy. It is tried and true. You draft the bats, you trade for the arms. Shane Baz, the latest arm that the Orioles have traded for, a young, intriguing arm under team control through 2029. But I think that'll just about do it for this week's edition of The Bird's Nest, this special edition of The Bird's Nest. Thank you so much for following along with us live on our YouTube and Facebook. Again, we tell you that we are going to have you covered if there is breaking news, and we have now done it 2 weeks in a row. We're going to try to take a little break for the holidays. We'll see if the Orioles end up letting us take a break for the holidays, but I do have a feeling, as we have said, that the Orioles are not done. I think there is more room to add in the starting rotation front. We'll see what the Orioles end up doing in the coming weeks, but make sure you stay locked into all of our MASN Orioles platforms. Whenever that news happens, we will have you covered. If you followed along with us live on YouTube and Facebook tonight, thank you very much. If not, you can catch us after the fact on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us here on The Bird's Nest. Big thank you to Annie Claff for joining me from Barnes & Noble. I'm Brendan Mortensen, and we'll catch you next time.